All right, here we are for our another installment, Conversations with Alternances. So this week you've got a whole selection of graphic scores, some 60 odd graphic scores, and want to just walk us through various scores.
Yeah. Again, thanks for pointing at the rabbit hole. And I didn't mean for it to be, I didn't mean that it should be 66 pages of this kind of stuff. But once I started looking at it, what I found here is there are pieces which are very important to us as percussionists and well known, some very important to percussion and less well known. But in tracing this whole history, which for me seems to go back to 1950, there were also such clear links with certain ideas. A certain composer would have an idea, a structural idea, a graphic drawing idea, not necessarily a percussion piece. Most of these are percussion pieces. A lot of them are pictures for any instrument, but there are a few piano pieces and just a few other things which I realized were such important links for me in this whole trajectory. Similarly, some of the pieces being famous and important, some that are here are, I would say, not quite a random example, but they show a point. They make it possible for us to go step by step through this whole thing, and so in that sense, it would be another conversation to discuss, to look at a smaller amount of these, which we might agree a half century later are tremendously remain significant as performance pieces, where many of these were significant at the moment of advancing us to where we got today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe we'll just, and some of these we can look at for 10 seconds, and some I'll have to talk about. And you'll stop me. You'll interrupt me, or when we're tired of the sound of my voice,
Sure.
we'll get yours. I'm going to go back one. Here, I'm sorry. This is my worst quality shot. But it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's 1950, Morton Feldman, and this is the earliest piece that I can figure out, credited with launching this idea of different kinds of notation. And there might be some European pieces that I'm not remembering, not thinking of, but here Feldman was, about 24 years old in 1950. It's the year he met Cage. And this is a solo cello piece. We can see it's drawn on graph paper, but its relationship to the Earl Brown pieces in 2 years later, 52 and 54, is so significant. I mean, Earl Brown would have seen this. Yeah, again, for Feldman, this is, you just see, on the bottom, you can't see it very well, but the bottom blocks are arco, and the middle blocks are pits, and the top blocks are harmonics. And we had looked last week even for a moment at this one, which is a piano piece from the next year. And the reason that these are so interesting to us is because we have King of Denmark, which is, this is familiar to us. Yeah. As a way to look at. And in this piano piece of 1951, here he simply divides the keyboard into low, middle, and high, and he gave, in this case, David Tudor, the density of activity in each of those regions. let's see. Okay, so here's a famous one, the Earl Brown, 1952, December 1952. So the title is simply when he made it. We mentioned this one last week because it's sort of a picture of three-dimensional space. So we don't know if the big ones are louder or closer, or that was part of his interest there. Four Systems, which comes 2 years after that. And again, you can sort of now think back to that very first Morton Feldman solo cello piece, which looks in some ways very much like this, with just these blocks of sound. This is one of my realizations of it. I think we all need to certainly admit at this moment in history, in fact, long ago already, that you have to figure these things out. You know, they're beautiful to look at, or challenging, or mysterious, but if you're really going to engage with them, you have to write all over them and figure out. Earl Brown doesn't say anything about timings, how fast these go. When I did this for myself, and I also did it with the group, with my colleagues, one of the things we decided on a timing was that whatever his shortest marks were, we wanted to be able to have a single stroke. So a single stroke was represented by whatever his shortest mark was, which actually made the piece go by very, very quickly. Really, did I skip one? Four Systems. Okay. Why did I? Okay, sorry, I missed this one. I wanted to put, this is also from 1952. It's the piece called Water Music, Cage's Water Music. And you see that he has the timings and his crazy timings, 5 seconds and 4,525.
Right.
Yes, and pour water. Okay, so again, he's figuring this all out on sort of graph paper, and he's getting his chance operations and being very anal about exactly where these things are falling. And it's not exactly a joke. Okay, you might not get it exactly at that time, but it's again, 1952, it doesn't look anything like these other pieces, and it's maybe not what we would think of exactly as a graphic score, but I'm not sure that's it's a vague term, right? And I wanted to just look at different kinds of experimental notations. So here, they're instructions, and instructions, sometimes you play very specific musical things, other times, you just need an instruction. Okay, so this one now is more familiar to us. Again, this is the Cage piece, 27 minutes, 10.554 seconds, from 1956. And here we have metal, wood, skin, and then an auxiliary line. He was marking imperfections on the paper, which is where he found these marks to make. Each page is a minute long, and he only draws systems where we need to have the information. So here, you play around 4 seconds, you play again around 9 seconds, you don't play again until 15 seconds, you're done by 45 seconds. So from 45 to 60 on this page, you're silent. The middle of the line here representing a middle force, meaning that high above the line is loud and below the line is soft. Here's what it looks like if you want to actually engage with this piece and play it. This is from our friend Bonnie Whiting, who combined it with the piece 45 minutes for a speaker. These pieces were all written at the same time, and Cage said they could be performed at the same time. Cage wasn't thinking of doing it simultaneously, and she did think of that. So she has a recording of this whole piece, but you see how she's marked very carefully everything that she needed to do. The most famous of all the Cage graphic scores is this one called Concert for Piano and Orchestra, another way to say the word concerto. They're big, beautiful pages originally, and so here they are strewn out on my floor, just to give a sense that I've forgotten at the moment how many pages there are, 60 or something like that. And the original printing comes in a very nice box on a very thick, glossy piece of paper. Once again, in the Tudor archives out at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, there are extensive notes, graph paper notes of all the calculations that David Tudor did to actually make something out of all of this. So, meaning he didn't improvise. This is from Fontana Mix, 1958. I think it's the first time he or anybody begins to use transparencies. So we often see pictures of Fontana Mix, in a book, an example of a score, which is actually a picture of one way to throw down all of these materials. But you see here, you get all kinds of pages of lines meandering all over the place. You get pages of dots, you get pages of dotted, more pages of lines and dots. And all of these you just toss down. Maybe in our era, or in my era, you tossed them down on a Xerox machine. And then you got a picture. And from there, you started to make your calculations. And what you play from is going to look, again, something like this. This is a realization of Fontana Mix. Again, happens to be something I did with Bonnie, seems in 2012, in the Cage year. We played at an art gallery called this Carl Solway Gallery. Solway was a guy who was a dealer for Cage's visual art. So we made a piece and called it, as you can find there in the middle of the bottom, Solway Mix, but it's all generated from the Fontana Mix materials. Cartridge music is another one. Here's from the last time Percussion Group Cincinnati played it, seems in October of '09. This was my part, 5 minutes of material. Once I had done all of the calculations, throwing down all of the transparencies, you get specific activities at specific times. There it is.
There it is.
The one we all know.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes,
can I back up and ask one question about cartridge music?
Uh-huh.
I thought, I seem to remember cartridge music being, that at least part of it was that didn't you trace the shapes on the page with a turntable arm or some kind of amplified thing, and you traced the paper, and that scratchy, screechy sound was part of the piece? Is that cartridge music, or am I thinking of that wrong?
Maybe you're conflating a couple of ideas. You're right that cartridge music, which I did not show an example of, but it's similar
to Fontana Mix, right?
It's very similar to Fontana. One difference in cartridge music is that there's a picture of a stopwatch. One of the transparencies is a clock face, and you throw that down, and where the lines go through the clock face gives you the timings. That here you see on my page, minute 1 at 4 seconds, at 9 seconds, at 11 seconds, at 21 seconds. That, and the cartridge is, as you say, back in 1960. What he was thinking of is literally the cartridge and needle taken off of a tone arm of a record player,
right? Used
as a contact mic.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so you could move it around or drag it or affix it to something and then play that. So yes.
Okay.
Zyklus, I mean, this is one where Zyklus, meaning German for cycle, and so maybe we'll, very important piece, but we don't have to say so much about it, other than the fact that it's even one that maybe we would make a good argument. It's not actually a graphic score. I mean, it's pretty traditional notation. Here's 30 iktai going across. Every page has 30 measures. He doesn't say how fast or slow they need to be, and he shows you what choices you might make, what needs to be inserted at precisely what time. But actually, it's a pretty standard kind of musical notation. Maybe a difference here is that it's one of the very earliest pieces where he didn't want to clutter the score with ancient Italian fortes and double pianos. So the size of the dot is the dynamic. Again, I'm sorry, not a great photo, but this is from the Haubenstock-Ramati piece Liasons of the same year as Stockhausen, 1959. It's one of 2 pages of this matrix where you follow across the top, down where you see the arrows, you can make a turn and go down. If you made a turn, you have to go back to where you were. So even though it's poorly photographed here, you see that all of the normally notated material for vibraphone is indeed absolutely specific, but you often alternate that with something which is like the Stockhausen, clearly implying some sort of 3-dimensional thing that you would not so much improvise, but it shows you a picture where clearly the pitches you're going to choose are 3 at those moments. So solo vibraphone, or with a pre-recording of yourself doing it on also vibraphone or marimba, or a duo with a marimbist. It's really, this for 1959, it's quite a nice piece. This is the piece by Italian Silvato Bussotti called Coeur. I don't say it very well, heart in French. Coeur pour Batteur, heart for percussionists. And you see here, it's just 1 page. It's part of a collection of 7 beautifully crazy pieces. And you see that it has many of the same, it seems to me he saw Zyklus, he saw the score to Zyklus over there on the right-hand corner. You even see the drum music, the rim shot kind of thing. But it begins to be, he doesn't say anything about what trajectory you read it in, or whether you keep turning the score, or how you do all of these things. It's a bit of, shall we say, a controlled improvisation. Maybe that's what we would say. I mean, there are a few passages with specific notes. Okay, this is the first introduction of some pieces which I'm going to say are not, with my apologies to these people specifically, I'm not showing these because I think these are necessarily iconic pieces that we need to know, but there are a number of Polish pieces from around this time. The composers we know best are Penderecki and Ludosławski, a little later Gorecki. This one is called it's from 1960. It's called Montaggio by Schaeffer, a guy named Schaeffer who taught in Krakow. It's a percussion part for a piece, 2 percussion and 4 pianos. And again, we see he's doing a good job at not writing percussion music on a piano staff. He's given you the number of lines that you need when you're going to play it, and it's in 20 different modules. This whole thing about the Polish scene in in the early, late 50s into the late 60s, in the days of what we still referred to as the Iron Curtain. The Soviet Union was still of great influence in every kind of way, in the arts as well. And most Soviet composers were still under the whole history of, we remember the story even of Shostakovich being very much threatened as late as 1950 about not writing music for the people,
Right.
and instead writing bourgeois, bourgeois kinds of fancy things. Somehow, I don't know the exact story, why Warsaw, why Poland had a little bit of breathing room on this. But unlike Hungary, maybe a little bit in Hungary as well, and certainly Czechoslovakia, not so much, and certainly not East Germany, but Poland had a vibrant avant-garde arts scene, and the festival called the Warsaw Autumn was one of the most famous and most important festivals in Europe. And many pieces, everybody went, all the famous composers from the West went to Warsaw for that week. There were many commissions. There was a very advanced electronic music studio there. So this is, one place where these pieces start to show up. 1960 still, this is from the Berio piece Circles. You see a soprano, the harp seems to be not involved on this page, and a percussionist on the upper staff and the lower staff, two percussion. On a fabulous E.E. Cummings texts, and these are the famous Berio boxes, which were very mysterious and not well described in the score. There's a whole history, like going back to the Bussotti solo piece, Heart, Coeur pour Batteur. In the instructions for that, he tells a very lovely story about that he had instructions. All of these pieces meant something. All of these notations meant something to him. And for whatever reason, so for a while, these were just circulated by hand amongst sympathetic performers. By the time it was 10 years later, when it was first published, somehow the publisher, there was even a little mess up or something, and the publisher didn't have the instructions. So at first they were published, and Bussotti just decided, well, actually, that's interesting. By now there's a word of mouth kind of how these things are done, and it's more interesting, not even to say what I thought it meant. Berio meant something very specific and didn't describe it very well in his initial instructions, but in the cases of all these boxes, he shows you which instruments are in play up there on the top. Apparently, I played the top part, and you can see that in the second or the second box at the top. Bongos. One of the things in play is bongos there. A thick line meant dense activity. A thin line meant less dense activity, because there's still dynamics. You see, even in that second box at the top, where I have bongos and other drums, it goes from piano to mezzo forte, but it goes also from thick to thin while that's happening. And it goes by, what the soprano is going to say, world is slapped. So I don't have a lot of time to do that. And there are many more instruments shown at any given moment than you're going to be able to play. Down at the bottom right-hand side, you see that there, the bass drum of the second player, after she says lightning, is a very specific pulse with ringing metals coming after it. So there are many things that float back and forth between controlled improvisation for just seconds of time to very specific things to do. more cage.
Mm-hmm.
This is also from 1961. It's a percussion part from the big orchestra piece called Atlas Eclipticalis, meaning it's an atlas of eclipses. It's star charts showing the history. I don't know exactly. You know, it's a scientific and an old scientific tome where he traced all of these stars. And all the orchestra parts look something like this, and any can be played. I mean, you could play Atlas Eclipticalis as a solo percussion piece, and here it is if you want to do it. Or there are, I forget, 10 percussion parts. The only reason I wanted to show this is because it's such an important moment. It's the first time something like this here, that horizontal line running through the center, unlike a couple of years earlier in the percussion piece where that was middle dynamic and above it was loud and below it was soft, here that middle line is the middle of your setup. And any number of instruments to the right and any number of instruments to the left. So what's fascinating is really for the first time, somebody is thinking about composing the choreography of the percussion and how you play, you know, these little things. Again, the dots are different sizes for soft to loud, but as you follow the path of these dots, he doesn't care what you hit at all, and it's certainly not low to high. You know, just put a whole bunch of instruments in front of you, a table full of all kinds of stuff, and you follow these paths from low to high. It's a kind of composition of the choreography of a percussionist. We said this last week, that one of the real influences in graphic, beautiful notations was composers needing to indicate electronic music so that performers could follow along as they played. This is from, again, 1961. It's the Stockhausen Kontakte, and up at the top is his drawing of the 4 channels of electronic sound, just representing kind of graphically what they sound like. In the middle is the percussion setup, a very quite difficult moment with your log drums and Almglocken and marimba. And actually, not a lot of the piece even looks quite like that. And then down at the bottom is the piano, which often looks just like that. Here, from the same, I think this is 62, 63, a Japanese composer, Shinohara, who was studying and working in Germany, was commissioned by the Strasbourg, the Strasbourg percussion group. So this is a piece called Alternances for 6 percussion. So you can find, you know, there are 6 lines here. And again, this is sort of fascinating. The whole piece doesn't look exactly, this is one of many pages. The marimba, you know, the keyboard music is full of very specific licks to play. But you see the influence here of both, of Stockhausen, right? The guy was working in Germany. So the individual dots, as time passes, you see metronome equals 100, then you have 1 second basically of a pause, and then it starts again at 100, and the music for tambourines and cymbals and the like is actually drawn like it's electronic music. You know, a very effective way to simply show how that works. Christian Wolff. This is the piece we're still in 1961. And I think I have another, here. A trio for 2 people on 1 piano and a single percussionist. And these are the first notations where I think a composer is actually sort of controlling with the notation one's listening to the piece, because you see that the pianists have mostly specific pitches to play, and the percussionist has all of these other Straight lines or diagonal lines, just there's a little list of a few instruments, glass, wood, tin can, such like that. But this is an indication of listening to simultaneous attacks or preceding attack or following an attack or a long tone, a short tone, meaning that it's even less of an improvisation as it is just having time passing in real life with your colleagues. You simply listen to what somebody else is doing. You watch what they're doing. Something, you hear something and you must follow it. Mm-hmm. You see somebody's going to do something and your instruction is you have to play something before they do it. So you get these really fascinating rhythms. This is a couple of years later. It's a better known piece, not for any particular reason, the one called For 1, 2, or 3 People. And here is when we did it. This must be from Black Earth days, because look there in the center, it says A, G, and S. I'm just noticing that now. That would be Al, Gary, and Stacy. I mean, we've played this a lot with Percussion Group Cincinnati, but we started it with Black Earth. So here's another thing where you choose a lot of your own instruments, but 1, 2, or 3 people, one person could deal with all of this material, or 2 could, or here we divided it up between 3. It's just one of many pages. And this is a notation which produces these fascinating ensemble interactions and rhythms where, the first thing in the upper left-hand corner, a single longer note with a vertical stem coming down from it, means that I have to play that note precisely in unison simultaneously with somebody else. I'm not going to know when Gary or Stacy is going to do something. I'm just paying attention. I see they're going to do something and I do something right with them. Mm-hmm. If I have my third notation there's a diagonal line rising into a soft long tone, means that soft long tone has to follow something that Gary or Stacy did. I have to connect my soft tone to something that I just heard. Whereas if it goes the other way, I have to keep my sound going until I see someone's going to do something else so that my sound will connect to what they're about to do, even though they don't know. I'm trying to make a chain of events. It's just wonderful. I don't know any music that makes the kind of ensemble playing and rhythms that this music does. I mean, it's quite hard. You have to really spend time at getting comfortable doing it. Barney Child's Take 5, from 1963, I think, 1962. It's a play. Look, this is the time of the Dave Brubeck and the famous jazz piece with Joe Morello.
Oh yeah.
Bum 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 bum. And so it's a little play on that. But as you see, it's a folio of piles of cards. Those are all like postcard size things. And to start the piece, you take 5 cards for as many people as you want to do the piece with. And there's all kinds of specific information on them. And, so it gets into a whole nother kind of notational thing of their instructions, instruction pieces. More Stockhausen from 63. This is the piece called Plus Minus. It's you can't play this. You can't play this. It's like it's a notation where he's showing you how he composed another piece, and you could compose a piece using every one of these things means something. You end up writing your own piece. It's a composition lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember Zhevsky did it and made a big piano piece. I think Zhevsky and Cardew. And Frederick told me, yeah, we made a piece for 2 pianos. And we were just pissed off that it was called then Stockhausen's piece. because we did all the work, you know. I mean, it was like a composition lesson, how to make a piece that sounds like Stockhausen.
Yeah.
This is
And
the
there's
famous,
the Cardew, yeah.
yes, here's the Cardew, the beautiful, wonderful piece called Treatise. It is a treatise on the idea of writing graphic notations. Just opened up to two of the, I forget how many hundreds, 200 pages. Um, it's quaint, it's cute that the whole piece has this grand staff at the bottom, implying, yeah, good luck. I don't know how you think this is going to be, but I think this is music. So don't just fool around, make some notes for yourself. Here's the original King of Denmark. From
Not that I've ever seen the original. I've only just seen the published score.
Yes.
So where does this come from?
This one is actually printed in the Cage book called Notation.
Oh, in Notations. Okay. I didn't realize it was there.
And you know, I think, of course, originally, again, it's written on graph paper, so the graph paper must have been a big sheet with light blue lines. So Feldman could see the graph. We don't see the graph paper here. And then it became clear to Feldman that, well, we need to see the graph paper. Yeah. So he redid it. But it's kind of attractive. It's pretty how it floats around here. Otherwise, everything is the same as the piece we now know. I think the next piece, let me show you this one first. Tune by the Italian composer Mario Bertoncini, or curiously, for any number of 5 suspended cymbals. So you see on the left hand of the page, there's the picture of the 5 suspended cymbals, the largest on the bottom, the smallest on the top. And he's showing you on the cymbal where to play these various kinds of things. Again, this is my part from the Black Earth days. Any number of people, so of course we played it with 4, so we divided up all the material, and you see that I found my path through it. That's what those red marking
lines
are showing me, and the other 3 guys were covering other stuff. Very clearly, you can see at the top of the page those dark triangles. Well, they're written on the very edge of the cymbal, as you see. It's bows, you know. It's bowing the cymbal. It's a very quick crescendo. Let it ring. So, etc. You get 2/3 of the way through, and there's a brush that you just drag across all 5 cymbals. That little squiggle, and then you start playing on the different cymbals with the brush. Then comes the open circles, which is a soft beater. It's not so easy to see that he specifies fingers. He was a pianist, so you play with different fingerings across the cymbals. There are places with fractions where you touch the cymbal at different nodal points along its length, from the edge to the dome, and that produces different harmonics. Any number of 5 cymbals, meaning it could be played as a single person, but probably more interesting if you did that to maybe do 2 passes and pre-record one of the passes. So it would be for 2 groups. And this is another piece that Bertoncini was working at the same time. This is a piano piece, and this is for all, similar kinds of things where there's some keyboard stuff. On the keyboard, you see at the far left, it's a similar kind of notation of low to high, the different regions of the piano. And most of this is all kinds of stuff happening inside of the piano. Some of it I would suspect is there because it looks great. I'm not sure how it's going to sound, but this is quite common that there are lots of pieces for piano interior at this time. to do this kind of work. Robert Moran. This is a piece from 1965, which was published. A lot of these pieces were not published or were not published till much later. Circulated in funny blueprint copies for long times. This one was published by Peters. And it's for 1 to 5 percussionists. So it's like, you can see it's been folded in quarters. You can sort of see I unfolded it. So it's quite a big sheet. There were some instructions about what these things meant to him, but again, I would say it's a controlled improvisation. Similarly, this is a piece also from 1965 called Aria for timpani and some instruments. What's cut off on this photograph is around at the far left and at the far right are little fragments of material for a little chamber group to play along. It's a tiny little timpani concerto from 1965. There are pages of instructions. These are the 2 drums, the larger and smaller timpani head, and all of the activity that should happen on these 2 heads, and then all of those marks to Giuseppe Englert, a Italian-Swiss composer, are described. What those different things actually meant, how to use different implements, what to do with them, how to plan the timing. Again, it becomes a very interestingly controlled improvisation. Aria for timpani. Still 1965, Larry Austin. A very simple score where he plans all of these timings. You see in that column that it goes, there's an electronic tape going along with this, and it goes from 0 to a little bit beyond 8. And it's fascinatingly timed that you read the instructions in performance. And it's also a concerto. It's kind of like a concerto grosso, large ensemble, small ensemble, the electronic tape, and then there's a conductor's part. This was another thing. Black Earth actually did this with the Sheboygan, Wisconsin City Band. It's the one thing, I mean, if I could have one recording of everything we've done, which I don't have, which doesn't exist, I guess, that would be pretty funny to hear. Black Earth with electronic tape with, a small town city band. Very, very kind of them, very good sports to do this. The way Larry figured it out is that he figured out how long it takes to read the instructions. So every time you just read through the instructions and you have, even though you kind of know it and you know what you're supposed to do, you read the instructions, it'll take you 1 minute and 5 seconds to read those instructions, which will bring you to the next thing to do. Again, it's a slightly controlled improvisation. The Cuban composer Leo Brouwer, not much of a Cuban kind of name. This is a piece from, I think, 1966, 66, called Conmutación. It's a trio, a percussion trio. Once again, you can sort of see that it's, it's almost, I'm going to say it's almost by now standard notation. It's very clear what he wants you to do and how to follow it along. It's just that you get to choose pitches and things. This is one of 4 or 5 pages of this piece by a person who he was a guitarist and wrote lots of guitar music. It's well known with guitarists. One more piece by Robert Moran, which is published in those beautiful volumes called Source Magazine, music of the avant-garde in the late 60s and 70s, very beautiful, expensively produced collections of scores. And this is a transparency you're supposed to make a slide of this. You project this, the percussionists project a slide of this onto a car. A car is brought onto the stage. You project this onto it, and then 5 percussionists play on the car where these notations are. I've never seen, you see all the things that operas get to bring on. I mean, you can bring an elephant on stage. Aida, we should be able to bring a car on stage.
You could just see asking the house manager.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring my Buick onto the park it right here.
This is a very important, probably not a very great piece, but an important piece. Proportions for solo percussion. It's the first example I know. This is 1967.
Farren, Martin Farren, is that right?
Good, Martin Farren.
Well remembered.
Yes, Martin Farren. I don't. Did I ever ask him back in the 70s I must have asked him, and I don't remember the answer, where he got the idea, how he came across this sort of thing. This is an acoustic notation, and you see in the bottom there of the right-hand page, he describes in detail acoustic properties, but you can see that they're does this work? Do you see my cursor when I do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So sorry, I'm not a 21st century person. Had I known that, I would have been showing you all kinds of stuff all along.
Now you know. There you go.
I know. Well, look at that. There's an X. He doesn't give the time, but again, for these things to work in some sort of, congenial sort of way, the piece goes by pretty quickly. And again, like the Feldman, it's low, medium, and high instruments. And basically you see the piece starts with the high ones and ends with the low ones. Mm-hmm. But they are pictures of acoustic events. So this kind of thing is, a hard attack and then a decay. This was a single hard attack is a square. A soft round attack was, of course, this kind of thing. So he describes all these metal, and metal was white shapes, black was wooden shapes. The X's and where are they? These kinds of these sorts of things were like tambourines or something that would be a conglomerate kind of sound. It was a small experiment for him to see if he could notate for percussion, again, composing the structure, the shape, and knowing in his mind what kind of timbres, without saying it has to be a triangle, it has to be a bass drum, but it's going to be from player to player. There will be individual instruments, but there will be creative solutions. Okay, so I'm just that many years later. Wow, you're kidding. All of that happened in between. Jumping ahead to 1974. So I saw the solo piece. Al O'Connor had a copy of it in DeKalb when the Black Earth group was there. I saw this piece in Al's library, was fascinated with this idea, and I found Martin Farren and asked him to write a piece for the Black Earth group. This is the piece called Musica Tridentina, because it's based on this stuff here, this fourth player, or we always did it as a trio with a pre-recorded tape, which we made. This is basically plain chant, sort of a Gregorian chant. It sounds like medieval music and played on deep bells that run very slowly through the whole length of this piece, from whence the title. And here are all these symbols again. And there's one solo part, which is the same, which simply runs in time, and you keep lined up with the tape or the fourth player playing this, let's call it Gregorian chant sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And the other two players throughout the 12 or 14 minutes of this have these wheels. They are cycles of going through these acoustic things. So you choose the instruments. Even somewhat recently, David Johnson and I met and reminiscing about things, and we both said that this was the most interesting piece. Both of us felt this was the most interesting piece that the Black Earth group had played. And we played it again. I played it with Jim and Bill Uhas in Cincinnati. So here, I have 45 seconds to simply make an ostinato, just going around, boom, bop, boom, boom, pop, tick, boom, pop, boom, pop, boom, boom, pop, whatever, and similarly here, scraping a metal, scraping a wood, scraping I forget now what they are. This one for me was a ratchet, just to crank a ratchet. Rounded is a soft attack. Flat is a harsh attack. So David and I were these two people, and apparently this one we did in a relationship of slowly 3 against 2. So as David would set up D, brr, ba, brr, bum, ba, boom, ba, boom, and I would lock into that. Throughout the whole piece, we just decided, do you want to just go? Is it random? Are we locked in? Are we playing the relationship? Farron doesn't say anything about that. You just get, we have 45 seconds to do this ostinato, and then, there are, I don't know, a dozen of them, 20 of them throughout the piece that you keep changing. Sometimes they're filled with many instruments. Sometimes they have only 2 instruments. You just keep doing it over and over as the soluist keeps lined up with the Gregorian chant.
So the solo lines just is, does it feel like a solo in the end, or is it?
David and I didn't want to admit that, but I guess all right, Gary.
Well, I was curious if it felt more like a solo, or does it, when we would experience it, feel just more like a trio? You wouldn't get the idea that person is a soloist necessarily.
You're correct. You would not.
Okay.
It certainly looks that way, but the fact that we've all built our own little, ultimately very mechanical setup, because these are things where some of these indications mean, it's wonderful how he describes them in a very unscientific, very unpercussion person kind of way, but just a composer who had feelings about what we must do. These sounds are described as metal on wood, then scraped. Metal on skin, then scraped. Wood on wood, then scraped. Metal on, so, you could take a threaded metal rod and put it through a brake drum, and that would be metal on metal and scraped.
Okay, I see.
What is metal on skin and scraped? I don't know. I ended up with a large Chinese tom-tom and an Glocken, and I just pushed the back and forth on that head. Mm-hmm. I built what I call the dowel harp. Cut all pieces of dowel, like this. So that was, and I used a wooden ruler. That was wood against wood, then scraped. Yeah. So you can imagine that the fun of this piece was this mechanical, scrape, scrape. You just keep doing these idiotic things over and over.
And this piece, this one is still available, or
it's available again, or it's available for the first time. Joey, our friend Joey Van Hassel, has recently purchased and revived the company called Media Press, which started in Urbana late in the 60s, the time of all of this fascinating experimental music. Later, Tom Saiwi, the percussionist, took it over, I think maybe in his first years of retirement, took over the company and was publishing a few things. And then somebody else took it and it sort of fell quite dormant. And Joey now has this company, Media Press.
Yeah, okay.
And now, of course, it's all, I mean, you can buy the physical copy, but it's all scanned and online. And he can send you he's got the Black Earth tape of our bells doing this. And you can get a PDF of the whole thing. What Joey did was to, keep the catalog alive of all of the pieces from decades ago,
Mm-hmm.
but he's adding interesting pieces in between. And in truth, many of these pieces that I'm talking about here that were never published, not well known, but that Joey saw in his years here in Cincinnati, just in the sedimentation of my shelves of things,
right.
which he thought, these are pieces that
should be known, or at least available. Yeah.
Know about them.
No, that's great.
So I don't know. We might be halfway through, and I mean, if
my goodness, it's 3:00. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, if you're willing, we could meet again, and I could finish.
Yeah, no, I think we should keep this going. I do have another thing to get to here, so I should go. But yeah, let's plan to just do another part 2 of this next time.
Yeah, I think I'm about halfway through the 66 scores.
Okay, perfect. Good. Well, this is a good stopping place too, and we got to plug in for Media Press as well, which seems good for looking at some of these pieces. So, all right, great.
Hey, thanks for asking.
All right. We'll see you later.
See you later.